Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and I'm really impressed on such a hot day with this sort of talk right at the end of the day that there are so many people left in the room. It sort of reminds me of the urban myth of a Labour Party local meeting where the guy came up to give a talk and he arrived and there was one person sitting in the room and he came up to the podium and he gave his talk anyway and he said, "Do you mind?" And the guy stayed, and at the end he packed his bags to walk off the stage and the guy in the audience said, "Would you mind staying?" And he said, "Why?" He said, "I'm the next speaker." So, thank you very much for staying. It's very much appreciated. On the basis that the talk will be incredibly dull as well, I thought what I've tried to do is include miscellaneous random pictures from the biosciences to try and make it entertaining as we go through. So that's enough of the trivial, and I should move on. I'm just going to say a few words about my own organisation, not lots, because I just think it's important in terms of the context about what I'm talking about today. Talking about organisations in the same space, competition, collaboration and merger. And as an organisation, we have a lot of different engagements, perhaps wider than many, just by the nature of who we are. So at the moment, our current business plan, which is due to be renewed, focuses on three core things. Being a unified voice, and that's important because it's about bringing the sector together and representing coherent views to government and the media. Having a professional membership, supporting our members, no surprise there, and a broader reach, trying to do things much more regionally and locally. And we have a really wide citizen science and public engagement programme, which underpins all that activity. So Royal Society of Biology, all about the biosciences, but very much in its broadest sense. We have individual members, a few of them are up here, about 18,500 of them. And the only thing I really want to stress about that is that they come from all walks of life. So we have school kids who are members, we have Nobel laureates and members, people in the teaching professions, in academia, in the private sector, in the public sector, and so on. An individual membership is something which is very important to us. It provides most of our income. And we ourselves are as a result of a merger, because 10 years ago, two organisations, the Institute of Biology and the Biosciences Federation, came together to form the Royal Society of Biology as it is now. So we've been through that process. And the experience of that may be relevant, I think, in terms of thinking about how easy it is to merge organisations. I'm not going to run through all these. You can go to our website and find out about them. But as you might expect, we do policy work, parliamentary work. I've just come from a parliamentary event this morning. Accreditation, we do membership services, providing services to other member organisations, membership, governance, bookkeeping, those sorts of things. We have competitions and events, and obviously if you want to know more, go to the website. We also do a lot of fun things as well, and this was last year with the Biology Olympiad. We had 68 countries came to the UK at the University of Warwick to compete to find the world's leading biologists, all aged 17 and 18. So we do a lot of youth work as well as for professional people working in the biosciences. So that's enough about us, and I just wanted to say that as a bit of background to create the framework for what I'm going to say next. And we'll come back to these two questions at the end, but if you could, get your gadgets out, whatever you have with the app on them, and we could perhaps do the first question. So do you think that the public expect like-minded charities to merge? Yes or no? A bit of context, there are 10 microbiology societies in the UK. In my last job, I worked for the National Society of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, National Institute. That has 100 other organisations working in the sector in deafness. So the question there, do you think that they should come together? Off you go. Is it working?
If you can hear us up there, we seem to have, all voting is over. It's changing. Good. Thank you.
Is it working now? Yes. It is. There we go. Okay. That's great. I'll let those, yeah, it's quite clear. A lot of support for like-minded charities coming together. Okay, that's quite interesting, and we'll look at some of the issues about doing that in a minute or two. Perhaps we could just go straight on to the next question, which I have on the interactive thing, which is cohabitation to share services practical? Yes or no? In other words, charities coming in to live together in the same place, which we've done, I'll talk about in a moment, and sharing all sorts of services and facilities. Okay. So we've got is that finished now? Probably. We've got a very positive yes to both those questions, which we'll come back to. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going to do three areas very briefly. The first one is about the member organisations of the Royal Society of Biology, RSB, the partners we deal with, and our home, Charles Darwin House, where we live and where we cohabit with 5 other societies. Competition. Competition is something which charities don't like to talk about, and I think this applies equally, I should say, to any of you in the room from bodies who aren't incorporated as charities. I'm sure you all compete in different ways. Charities compete with each other all the time over all sorts of things. You only have to look at something like the care sector, where a number of charities are providing care home services. They're competing for contracts with local authorities. We compete with members from other science organisations. Competition is pretty common. And in that sense, I don't think charities are any different at all to the private sector. And of course, charities often compete with the private sector. But competition is fruitful most of the time, as we'll come on to. So taking just the first item there, the member organisations of the Royal Society of Biology, we have about 100 organisations. Some of them, and you'll see their logos here, are not surprising perhaps. They're big organisations who provide some money to support our work, AstraZeneca and Pfizer's and the Wellcome Trust and people like that. They're actually in the minority. The vast majority of our member organisations are other bioscience learning societies. Some of them have staff, sometimes they're volunteer-led. All of them have members. All of them are charities, and all of them pretty much have publishing which supports the work that they do through scientific journals. So these are our member organisations. And what I'd like to do is take a bit of a closer look at how that actually works in practice, because the relationship between us and a member organisation is actually quite complicated, and these are damselflies if you're interested. Okay, so here's a box with a few things in just to talk about very quickly. Competition. Where do we compete with our member organisations? Well, we all have members. So if you're an immunologist and you're a member of the Society for Immunology, you might be a member there, but you might also be a member of the Royal Society of Biology, because biology is an overarching subject. Same applies to ecology or biochemistry or any of those subjects. Publishing. Sometimes publishing, of course, as you well know in the audience better than I do, is very segmented. But other times people are competing, to get the same papers into journals. Microbiology journals could be biochemistry could be microbiology, and so on. So I mean, there is a lot of competition in publishing. I don't need to tell you that. Third-party services. We provide services to other organisations, as do people in the private sector, as do other charities. So we compete with some of our member organisations who do that. We offer training. But training, I think, also is somewhere we can collaborate, because providing we don't provide services which are in direct competition, we can actually benefit from collaborating in the training space. So, for example, the Biochemical Society might run a specialist training area on something, I don't know, like molecular signalling, something really very, very specialised. We're never going to run that, we're not experts in that. We might run something on the way in which a scientific charity operates, or we might do something about public engagement. Those things we can collaborate on. So I think that's a space where both things are true. We also, of course, collaborate on the policy agenda. If we want to talk to government, it's much more powerful to have a single voice where we can all say the same thing. Government likes nothing more than for all the charity sector to be saying different things to it, so they can just ignore everybody. If we come together and have a unified voice, we can make a difference. So collaboration is a clear area for our policy agenda. Merger. So in the question earlier, there was a lot of sort of sense that the public would expect like-minded charities to come together. So I suppose one of the questions is how like-minded do you have to be? So ecology and something like pharmacology, perhaps very, very different subject areas. Biochemistry, microbiology, very, very similar in many ways. So, is there a move there that they could come together? So I think it does depend on where you are. But I think in practice, the only real reason that charities merge, despite what the public and most people might think, is because of financial weakness or because there's a drive in terms of public benefit. So, somebody with a policy agenda forces it to happen effectively by creating the right environment. When we came together for 2 organisations, there were 2 key drivers. Both the chief executives were about to retire. That's pretty helpful if you're merging 2 organisations where no one wants to take over. Both organisations were financially weak. And the government, at the time, Lord Sainsbury, who was the science minister, was very clear that he was fed up of hundreds of bioscience organisations coming along and talking to him. He just wanted to hear it from one organisation on the top level stuff. So there was a policy dynamic to that as well as a financial driver. So that's some of the reasons I think why mergers can happen. Why don't they happen a lot of the time? Well, actually, if you're an organisation that has quite a lot of income, publishing is the main source of income, and that's the topic earlier on your agenda, so we won't rehearse that. But all the while, you're being funded quite comfortably by your publishing income. There's not a huge incentive for you to merge with another organisation. Your trustees probably, like being associated with the particular organisation. There'll be a history. What's the incentive for them to do that? The culture of the organisation may be very, very different. Unless the cultures are similar, again, it's very difficult to see people coming together. Members themselves in membership organisations are very attached often to their particular body and do not want to see it change. So I think there are many reasons why these things don't happen. And NIMBYism, if somebody's done something, the natural tendency of a lot of organisations and individuals a lot of times to say, well, I don't want to do that because they did that, we want to do our own thing. So I think there are lots of reasons why it doesn't happen, and that's borne out by the fact that merger in the charity sector, particularly in the science sector, is quite unusual. It does happen, as it did with us, but it's not very common. So that was a little bit on the member organisations. The next bit is very, very short, partners across science. I'm not going to spend any time on this because I think you'll all be very, very familiar with it. These are some of our partner organisations. They're no different to anybody else's. Some are grant funders, some we work with to deliver a particular activity, and so on. The only thing I want to say about this is it's very different from having member organisations, because when you have a member organisation, there's an expectation within the relationship about the way things work. So, for example, if we decide to put on a particular event and we have our member organisations involved, do we charge them for that, or do they assume that they should be provided free because they're a member organisation? In this sort of partner arrangement, it's very clear. You have a legal arrangement perhaps to start off with. It might be just an agreement in principle. It's quite clear how the operation works. And the drivers are very different for this type of collaboration and much more straightforward. And it does mean that if you want to be like the bird at the top right-hand corner and not do the same as all the other organisations in a collaboration, it's much easier to do it because you pick and choose. It's a potpourri effect where you decide what you want to get involved in and what you don't. Member organisations are a bit different. So to finish up with, I just want to say a little bit about Charles Darwin House. So Charles Darwin House is actually now consists of 2 buildings. There are 6 science organisations who co-own it. We're one of them. There are 5 others. And we share the cost of running those buildings, and there are tenants in one of the buildings, and the income from those tenants is shared. So it sort of sounds quite good. And this is what it looks like. Not very exciting, I'm afraid. So Charles Darwin House, it's just the name. He clearly had nothing to do with this building. But it's functional. So if you think about organisations coming together, it sounds like a really great idea in principle, because you can do things like you could share your IT infrastructure, you could share your human resources, perhaps you could share your membership systems and processes. Perhaps you could co-locate your policy staff in certain areas in the building so that they're all together from different organisations. All the people who are going out and doing public engagement, let's put them from the different organisations all together and work together. So that's all the sort of thing that I think came out of the discussion when the organisations came together. Initially there were 3, then there were 4, then there were 5, and then eventually the current 6 organisations. So all these sorts of things, I think, are the issues which we were thinking about and others were thinking about at the start of this sort of 7 or 8 years ago. But do you need a prenup? Well, in this example here, we have a nice handwritten agreement, which is pretty much what happened, actually. There was a legal framework. It wasn't, we weren't doing what we shouldn't do. We were doing things properly. But in reality, the idea and the concept between coming together was about the passion and desires of the trustees of those organisations at the time. And I think that is really important because, as we all know, trustees change. And as the trustees change, that corporate knowledge and the culture evolves with it. And 7 years later, the views and desires of the trustee boards of 6 organisations are very different to the ones that were set out originally. So do you need a prenup? Well, actually, I think you pretty much do. And it's not about the legal framework, important though that is. It's about setting out right at the outset, what's the ambition? Where do we want to go? Paint the promised land, and how do we get there? Everyone buys into it. Because even something like the co-ownership agreement, which explains how we're all supposed to work together, when you have a turnover of staff and turnover of trustees, by the time you get to the point where you might disagree about something, everyone's forgotten the way it was written, why it was structured that way, and actually it becomes quite challenging. IT services. We all want to share IT services, except if you move into a building with somebody and as a result of sharing your IT services, you have to scrap all your software and you have to take up the software and IT infrastructure approaches of the other organisation, then which one do you go with out of the 6? And how easy is that? And are you prepared to make the investment? Answer, actually no. How easy is it for organisations sharing a building on different floors to all integrate and engage with each other? Well, if you have a common canteen or something, maybe. In this building we don't. So how often do people from one floor go to another floor? The answer is they don't go to those floors any more than if they were in a building about half a mile down the road, because it's done on the basis of need and requirement. So there are some really important issues, I think, about coming together into a building, which is worth thinking about if you wanted to go down that route. It's not to say it can't happen, I just think it's important to say there are quite a few pitfalls. So I hope that gave a sort of flavour of some of the things that we faced as an organisation. And I just wanted to conclude with a few lessons, perhaps, that I take away from what we've done. So the first one is what I've just been saying, understanding why, actually, there's a need for collaboration. The driver to share services is not good enough. There has to be a business requirement. You know, what are you trying to achieve as a result? You could have completely random organisations who share infrastructure. But actually, if you're like-minded, you know, why is it important that those particular organisations come together? Recognising that the culture and complexity issues are different, accepting that competition exists, and actually the organisations in Charles Owen House, as well as being our member organisations, also compete with each other in all the areas that I described earlier. There needs to be a realistic time frame, and you need to accept that there will be adaptation, because different people will want different things from the partnership as you move forward. And keeping the legal frameworks simple and practical. Our co-ownership agreement is 70 pages long. By the time you've got to the end of reading it, you've forgotten what happened at the beginning of it, so you have to go back and reread it again. You need something which sets out something in a very clear and concise way. And finally, I think that it's all very well to talk about the benefits of working together, but there is an opportunity cost. You're not going out and doing the other things while you're devoting staff time and trustee time to delivering some sort of merger or cohabitation or collaboration. So that brings us pretty much to the end. I just want to ask the same questions again to see if there's any different views in that. So do you think the public expect like-minded charities to merge? Probably shouldn't change. They haven't heard the talk. Yeah, that's good. But what about the second one? Is cohabitation to share practical services practical? Yes or no? Is that everyone done? Almost at the end. I think it's not too far off, actually, where we started out. Okay, thank you. So finally, just to say, everything that I've been talking about is pretty complex and involved. It's not straightforward at all. Very happy to talk about some of the detail if it's of value. And I hope you like the pictures. This is a mouse, heart, and associated organs under a microscope. Thank you to our strategic partners. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So we've got time for a few questions directly for Mark, if there are from the floor. Out there, because you know I will if you don't. No? Well, I will. Oh, we've got one. Sorry. Yeah. Can you just get the mic?
Thanks, and it's a fairly sort of straightforward one, but If you went through that entire process of integration again, are there any sort of key things you'd really learn from? Think, yeah, I'm going to do that one differently.
So I think there are a few things. One of the first ones is, I think, just setting out in a sort of much clearer, focused business plan why the collaboration is important, rather than focusing it on what are the services you're going to share and what the cost savings will be. So a bit more about the philosophy behind it, so that we can refer back to that. And the other thing I would change, which I didn't mention in my talk, is that we all own the buildings in different proportions. So we own 8.2% of the two buildings. One of the other partners owns 29.4% of the buildings. We all have an equal vote. This means that if you have a discussion about repairing the roof, and we think it's a really good idea, and it's going to cost £100,000, it costs us £8,000, and we think that's not too bad. Whereas the other organisation costs them 29, and they're thinking, well, actually, no, I think we can wait 2 or 3 years, So I think having an equal share of the equity across the organisations would be ideal. And the reason it wasn't set up that way was simply because of the financial strength of the different partners.
Are there any other questions from the floor? Well, I will ask mine anyway. We've talked about the positive reasons for collaboration or indeed merger, but is coexistence in the long term even possible, or are we actually going to see some casualties?
I think most of that will depend on what happens to the core income streams. So I do think it's financially driven. As soon as in our world, the academic community, who are members of a lot of these organisations, it's much wider than that for us, but some of our member organisations, a lot of academics are members. They benefit from supported attendance at international conferences, domestic conferences, access to publications, to training at reduced rates, those sorts of things. As soon as the ability of the organisation to subsidise those to the same extent, and they start delivering them actually on a fully commercial basis, I think that's the point at which it becomes quite tricky. And I suspect when that happens, you will see some of those organisations disappear.
Okay. Well, thanks again to Mark.